A millionaire followed a little beggar girl who'd stolen from him on the street. But when he saw what she intended to do, he broke down in tears. Elliot Sinclair was a name that carried weight in the bustling city of New York. At just 38, he had built Sinclair Enterprises into a multi-billion-dollar empire, dominating industries from real estate to technology. His face adorned magazine covers, and his presence was a fixture at high-profile charity events. Yet, for all his wealth and success, Elliot felt an emptiness that money couldn't fill. His penthouse apartment was an architectural marvel, perched high above Manhattan, but it was eerily silent. No laughter, no warmth, just the faint hum of city life below. This was the price of ambition, he often told himself. There was no time for family, no room for relationships. His drive to succeed had come at a steep personal cost. On this particular evening, Elliot was running late. His assistant, Clara, had meticulously planned his schedule, but a last-minute meeting had delayed him. "Your car is ready downstairs," Clara said as she walked briskly beside him in the glass-walled office. "Thanks, Clara," Elliot said, grabbing his coat. "Let's hope the gala hasn't started without me." "It's a charity auction," Clara reminded him. "I'm sure they'll wait for their biggest donor." Elliot gave a small smile. "Let's hope my wallet can still impress them." As he stepped into the elevator, he felt a pang of guilt. These events were supposed to mean something, but lately, they felt more like obligations. The streets of Manhattan were alive with activity as Elliot's black town car wove through the traffic. Pedestrians hurried along the sidewalks, bundled against the crisp November air. Elliot gazed out the tinted window, his thoughts drifting. He watched the people outside, students with backpacks, couples holding hands, and an elderly man playing a saxophone on a street corner. Amid the chaos, one figure caught his eye, a small girl sitting on the curb, her thin frame huddled against the cold. "Stop the car," Elliot said suddenly. The driver glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "Sir." "Pull over," Elliot insisted. Stepping out onto the sidewalk, Elliot approached the girl cautiously. She looked to be no older than 10, with tangled hair and oversized clothes that hung off her small frame. A cardboard sign lay on the ground beside her, scrawled with the words, "Hungry and cold. Please help." "Hey," Elliot said gently, crouching down to her level. The girl looked up, her dark eyes wary. "What's your name?" he asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she clutched the edge of her tattered jacket, as if bracing herself against his presence. Elliot reached into his wallet and pulled out a crisp $20 bill. "Here," he said, holding it out to her. "Get yourself something to eat." She stared at the bill for a long moment before snatching it and bolting down the street without a word. Elliot stood there, watching her disappear into the crowd. Something about her haunted him, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. Later that night, Elliot sat at the charity gala, surrounded by wealth and opulence. The room buzzed with conversation, the clinking of champagne glasses punctuating the air. "Elliot, you've outdone yourself," one of the attendees said, clapping him on the back. "That donation will go a long way." Elliot nodded politely, but his mind was elsewhere. He couldn't stop thinking about the girl on the curb, the desperation in her eyes, the way she had fled. "Are you okay?" Clara asked, leaning in. "I'm fine," Elliot said quickly. "Just thinking." The next morning, Elliot found himself walking through the same neighborhood where he had seen the girl. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, but he felt compelled to return. As he rounded a corner, he spotted her again. This time, she was rummaging through a trash can, her small hands digging through discarded wrappers. "Hey!" Elliot called out. The girl froze, her head snapping up. When she saw him, she bolted again, darting into a nearby alley. "Wait!" Elliot shouted, chasing after her. But by the time he reached the alley, she was gone, leaving only the faint echo of her footsteps behind. Elliot stood there, catching his breath. Whoever this girl was, she needed help. And he wasn't going to give up until he found a way to reach her. Elliot Sinclair couldn't shake the image of the girl from his mind. That night, as he sat in his penthouse, the glow of the Manhattan skyline spilling through the floor-to-ceiling windows, he sifted through potential solutions. He had the resources to help, more money than anyone could reasonably spend in a lifetime, but what good was it if he couldn't even reach her? The following morning, he made a call. "Clara, can you meet me at the office?" His assistant's voice was tinged with surprise. "It's Saturday, Elliot." "I know, but I need your help with something personal." Clara arrived at the Sinclair Enterprises building an hour later. Elliot was waiting in his office, his usually composed demeanor replaced with restless energy. "What's going on?" Clara asked, setting her bag on the couch. Elliot handed her a piece of paper with a hastily sketched description of the girl. "I need to find her." Clara raised an eyebrow. "Who is she?" "A kid I saw on the street," Elliot said. "She's homeless, and I think she's in trouble." Clara studied him for a moment. "This isn't like you." Elliot shrugged. "Maybe it should be." Using his connections, Elliot contacted local shelters, charities, and even the NYPD, hoping for a lead. But no one had seen or heard of a girl matching the description. "Sometimes they slip through the cracks," one shelter worker told him. "Kids like that, they don't want to be found." The words stuck with him, gnawing at his sense of responsibility. 2 days later, Elliot's persistence paid off. Clara walked into his office with a determined expression. "I think I found her," she said, holding up her tablet. Elliot leaned forward as Clara showed him a grainy photo taken near a food bank. The girl was sitting on the curb, clutching a brown paper bag. "Where was this?" he asked. "East Village," Clara said. "Near St. Margaret's." Elliot grabbed his coat. "Let's go." The East Village was bustling with activity as Elliot and Clara arrived. They parked near the food bank and began scanning the area. It didn't take long for Elliot to spot her. The girl was sitting on a bench near the entrance, her head down as she nibbled on a sandwich. "There she is," Elliot whispered. Clara nodded. "What's the plan?" "I'll talk to her," Elliot said, stepping out of the car. As Elliot approached, the girl looked up, her eyes narrowing with recognition. "You again," she muttered, clutching her sandwich protectively. Elliot crouched down to her level, keeping his voice gentle. "I'm not here to stare you. I just want to talk." "Why?" she asked suspiciously. "Because you look like you could use some help," he said. The girl snorted. "You think money fixes everything, don't you?" Elliot paused, taken aback by her defiance. "Maybe not, but it's a start." She shook her head, standing up. "I don't need your charity." "Then what do you need?" Elliot asked, his tone firm but kind. The girl hesitated, her guard faltering for a moment. "You wouldn't understand." "Try me," he said. She looked at him for a long moment before sighing. "My name's Lily," she said finally. "Nice to meet you, Lily," Elliot said, offering a small smile. "I'm Elliot." "Yeah, I know who you are," she said. "Rich guy in the papers." Elliot chuckled softly. "Guilty." "Now, can I buy you something to eat?" Lily hesitated again but eventually nodded. "Fine. But just this once." Over burgers and fries at a nearby diner, Lily's defenses began to lower. She told Elliot bits and pieces about her life, how she'd been on the streets for 2 years, how she avoided shelters because they didn't feel safe, and how she managed to survive by staying invisible. Elliot listened intently, his heart breaking at every detail. "Where's your family?" he asked gently. "Gone," she said flatly. "It's just me now." Elliot nodded, not wanting to push her further. "Lily, I want to help you." She looked at him skeptically. "Why?" "Because I can," he said simply. Lily studied him, searching for any hint of insincerity. Finally, she shrugged. Do whatever you want. Just don't expect me to stick around. Elliot smiled faintly. We'll see about that. As they left the diner, Elliot handed Lily a business card. If you ever need anything, call me, he said. Lily took the card reluctantly, shoving it into her pocket. Don't hold your breath, rich guy. Elliot watched as she disappeared into the crowd, his determination solidifying. He didn't know how yet, but he was going to make a difference in her life. The following days were a whirlwind for Elliot. He couldn't shake the thought of Lily, the fierce and guarded girl who had somehow stirred something inside him. He instructed Clara to set up meetings with local charities and youth organizations, determined to do more for the city's homeless youth. Meanwhile, Lily stayed true to her word, she didn't call. But Elliot wasn't surprised. Trust wasn't built overnight, especially not for someone who had spent years fending for herself. One afternoon, Elliot was walking through Central Park, enjoying a rare moment of solitude. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves, and the park buzzed with the usual mix of joggers, dog walkers, and tourists. As he crossed a footbridge, he spotted a familiar figure sitting on a nearby bench. Lily was there, her head bent as she scribbled something in a small notebook. Elliot approached cautiously, not wanting to startle her. Hey, Lily, he said softly. She looked up, her eyes widening in surprise. You again. Fancy seeing you here, he said with a small smile. Lily closed her notebook and shoved it into her bag. What do you want? Nothing, Elliot said, sitting on the bench beside her. Just taking a walk. She eyed him suspiciously but said nothing. They sat in silence for a few moments, watching the ducks glide across the pond. Why do you keep showing up? Lily finally asked. Because I care, Elliot replied honestly. Lily scoffed. You don't even know me. Maybe not, he admitted. But I know enough to see that you're struggling. And I want to help. Lily turned away, her jaw tightening. I don't need your help. Elliot didn't push. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small wrapped sandwich. Here, he said, placing it on the bench between them. Lily hesitated before snatching it up. Thanks, she muttered. Elliot smiled, feeling a flicker of hope. The next morning, Elliot had a meeting in one of his downtown offices. As he stepped out of his car and into the bustling street, he felt a slight tug on his coat. Before he could react, a small figure darted away, weaving through the crowd. It took Elliot a moment to realize what had happened. His wallet was gone. Hey, he shouted, chasing after the thief. The figure turned the corner into an alleyway, and Elliot followed, his heart pounding. Stop, he called out. As he rounded the corner, he froze. The thief had turned to face him, and to his shock, it was Lily. Lily's eyes widened in recognition, and for a split second, she hesitated. But then she turned and bolted again. Lily, wait! Elliot shouted, running after her. The alley was a maze of dumpsters and fire estates, but Elliot was determined not to lose her. Stop, he called again, his voice echoing off the brick walls. Finally, Lily skidded to a halt near a dead end. She turned to face him, her chest heaving with effort. Give it back, Elliot said, his tone firm but calm. Lily glared at him, clutching the wallet tightly. Why should I? Because it's not yours, he said simply. Her eyes darted around, searching for an escape. I needed it, she said defensively. Elliot softened. For what? Lily didn't answer. Instead, she hurled the wallet at his feet and took off again, disappearing through a gap in the fence. Elliot picked up the wallet, his mind racing. Something wasn't adding up. Lily wasn't a pickpocket, at least, not in the way professional thieves were. There was desperation in her actions, not malice. That evening, Elliot couldn't shake the memory of their encounter. Why had she done it? And what could have driven her to such extremes? He made a decision. "Clara," he said, dialing his assistant. "I need you to find out where Lily goes after dark." Clara hesitated. "Elliot, you can't just track people." "It's not about spying," Elliot interrupted. "I think she's in trouble, and I need to know what's going on." Clara sighed but agreed. "I'll see what I can do." The next day, Clara called him with an update. "She's been seen near a shelter in Brooklyn," Clara said. "St. Michael's. But it doesn't look like she's staying there. She hangs around for a bit, then leaves." Elliot's mind raced. Why would Lily go to a shelter if she wasn't staying? "I'm going there," he said, grabbing his coat. That evening, Elliot arrived at St. Michael's shelter. The building was modest, with faded brick walls and a flickering neon sign. Inside, the air was warm and smelled faintly of soup. Elliot approached the front desk, where a middle-aged woman with kind eyes greeted him. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'm looking for someone," Elliot said. "A girl named Lily. She's about 10 years old." The woman frowned. "Lily doesn't stay here, but she comes by sometimes." "Why?" Elliot asked. The woman hesitated. "She takes food, but she's not here for herself. She's helping someone else." Elliot's chest tightened. "Who?" The woman lowered her voice. "There's an old man she visits. Lives in one of the abandoned buildings nearby. I think he's sick." Elliot felt a surge of realization. Lily hadn't stolen from him out of greed, she had done it to help someone in need. Without another word, Elliot left the shelter, determined to find the truth. The streets of Brooklyn were quieter than Manhattan's bustling avenues, but they carried their own weight of stories. As Elliot made his way toward the abandoned buildings near St. Michael's shelter, he couldn't stop thinking about what the woman at the shelter had told him. Lily wasn't just surviving, she was helping someone else, someone who was depending on her. The abandoned buildings loomed ahead, their windows boarded up and graffiti scrawled across the walls. Elliot hesitated before stepping into the crumbling structure. The faint smell of mildew and decay greeted him as he climbed a set of broken stairs. "Lily," he called out, his voice echoing in the empty halls. For a moment, there was silence. Then, he heard the faint shuffle of footsteps. Elliot turned a corner and saw her. Lily was crouched beside a frail older man lying on a makeshift bed of blankets. She was holding a small plastic bag, pulling out a container of soup. "Lily," Elliot said softly. She spun around, her face pale. "What are you doing here?" "I came to find you," Elliot said, stepping closer. His eyes shifted to the man on the floor. "Who's this?" Lily moved protectively in front of the man. "He's none of your business." "Lily," Elliot said gently, "I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to understand." She hesitated, her gaze darting between Elliot and the man. Finally, she sighed. "His name's Joe. He used to work at a factory, but it shut down. He lost everything. Now he's sick, and no one cares." Elliot's chest tightened as he looked at the man, whose hollow cheeks and labored breathing told a story of suffering and neglect. "How long have you been helping him?" Elliot asked. "A year," Lily said quietly. "I bring him food, blankets, whatever I can find." Elliot nodded, his respect for Lily growing by the second. "And that's why you took my wallet?" Lily flushed, looking down. "I didn't have a choice. He needed medicine, and I couldn't afford it." Elliot crouched beside her, his voice firm but kind. "You should have asked me. I would have helped." "Why would you care?" Lily snapped, her eyes flashing. "Because no one should have to go through this," Elliot said. "Not you, and not Joe." Over the next hour, Elliot helped Lily clean up the small space where Joe lived. He asked her questions about Joe's condition, trying to piece together how he could help. Has he seen a doctor? Elliot asked. Lily shook her head. He can't. No insurance, no money. Elliot pulled out his phone. That's about to change. What are you doing? Lily asked, her tone suspicious. I'm calling a doctor I know, Elliot said. He'll come here and check on Joe. Lily looked at him skeptically. Why are you doing this? Because I can, Elliot said simply. The doctor arrived an hour later, carrying a medical bag and a warm smile. He examined Joe thoroughly, his expression growing serious as he took notes. He's malnourished and dehydrated, the doctor said. And he has a respiratory infection. If we don't get him treated soon, it could get worse. What does he need? Elliot asked. Hospital care, for starters, the doctor said. Lily's face fell. He'll never agree to that. He doesn't trust hospitals. Elliot knelt beside Joe, who opened his eyes weakly. Joe, Elliot said softly, you don't know me, but I want to help. Will you let me? Joe stared at him for a long moment before nodding faintly. Elliot turned to the doctor. Make the arrangements. That night, Joe was admitted to a nearby hospital, where he received immediate care. Lily stayed by his side, holding his hand as nurses worked around him. Elliot watched from the doorway, his heart heavy with both sorrow and hope. You did a good thing tonight, Clara said quietly, appearing beside him. It wasn't just me, Elliot said. Lily's been doing this for a year. She's the real hero. Clara smiled. Maybe. But you're the one who gave her the chance to make a difference. Elliot nodded, his mind already racing with plans. The next morning, Elliot met with hospital administrators, arranging for Joe's care to be covered by a charitable fund he quietly set up. He also met with a social worker to discuss long-term housing options for Joe and Lily. When he returned to the hospital, Lily was waiting for him in the hallway. They said everything's paid for, she said, her voice filled with disbelief. How? I took care of it, Elliot said. Lily's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time, her tough exterior cracked. Why would you do this? Elliot placed a hand on her shoulder. Because everyone deserves a chance. Even me. Lily sniffled, wiping her eyes. Thank you. You're welcome, Elliot said. As they stood together in the quiet hallway, Elliot realized that helping Lily and Joe had filled a void he hadn't even known existed. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose, one that couldn't be measured in dollars or success. He had found something far more valuable, connection. The next few days were a whirlwind of change for everyone involved. Joe remained in the hospital, where his condition began to stabilize under the careful watch of doctors and nurses. Meanwhile, Lily found herself grappling with a flood of emotions, relief, gratitude, and a cautious hope she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Elliot visited the hospital daily, ensuring that Joe had everything he needed. Each time he arrived, Lily greeted him with a mixture of awe and hesitation. She wasn't used to people sticking around, let alone someone like Elliot Sinclair. On the 5th day, Elliot walked into Joe's room carrying a small stack of papers. Lily looked up from where she sat beside Joe's bed. What's that? She asked warily. Elliot handed her the papers. It's a housing agreement, for both of you. Lily's eyes widened as she scanned the documents. You found us a place to live. It's a small apartment near the hospital, Elliot said. Enough space for you and Joe to have a fresh start. Lily's hands trembled as she held the papers. Why are you doing all this? Elliot crouched beside her, his expression sincere. Because you've been doing so much for Joe, even when you had nothing yourself. You shouldn't have to struggle like this. Let me help you. Tears welled in Lily's eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to, Elliot said gently. Joe, who had been quietly observing the exchange, reached out and placed a frail hand on Elliot's arm. "Thank you, son," he said, his voice weak but filled with emotion. "You've given us hope." Elliot nodded, his chest tightening. "It's the least I could do." Over the next week, Elliot worked closely with a team of social workers to ensure that Lily and Joe's transition to their new apartment was smooth. He also took steps to address Lily's long-term future, arranging for her to finish her education through a scholarship he quietly set up in her name. "Are you serious?" Lily asked when he told her. "Completely," Elliot said. "You're smart, Lily. You deserve a chance to make something of yourself." She stared at him, her tough exterior faltering. "No one's ever believed in me like this." "Well, get used to it," Elliot said with a smile. On the day Lily and Joe moved into their new apartment, Elliot helped carry boxes up the narrow staircase. The apartment was modest but clean and filled with light, a far cry from the cold, abandoned building they had called home. "This is amazing," Lily said, looking around in awe. It's perfect." Joe, sitting in a chair by the window, nodded in agreement. "Feels like a second chance," he said. Elliot smiled. "It is. For both of you." That evening, as the sun set over the city, Elliot stood on the apartment's small balcony, gazing out at the skyline. Lily joined him, her expression thoughtful. "You know, when I first met you, I thought you were just another rich guy who didn't care about people like us," she said. Elliot chuckled. "I don't blame you for thinking that. But you proved me wrong," she continued. "You didn't have to do any of this, but you did." "Why?" Elliot took a deep breath, his gaze distant. "Because I've spent most of my life chasing things that don't matter. Money, success, power, they're all meaningless if you can't use them to make a difference. You and Joe reminded me of that." Lily nodded, her eyes glistening. "Well, for what it's worth, you've made a difference for us." Elliot smiled, his heart full. "That means more than you know." The following weeks marked a turning point for Elliot. He began dedicating more time to philanthropic efforts, using his resources to support causes that addressed homelessness and poverty. His relationship with Lily and Joe deepened, and they became an unexpected but welcome part of his life. For Lily, the change was transformative. With a safe place to live and the chance to pursue her education, she began to dream of a future she had never thought possible. Joe, too, found renewed strength, buoyed by the care and support he now received. Months later, Elliot hosted a charity event at one of his properties, this time with a renewed sense of purpose. Among the guests were Lily and Joe, who mingled with the crowd, their transformation evident to all. As Elliot watched them from across the room, Clara approached him with a knowing smile. "You look happy," she said. "I am," Elliot replied. "For the first time in a long time." That night, as Elliot walked Lily and Joe to their car, Lily turned to him and said, "You didn't just help us, Elliot. You saved us." Elliot shook his head. "You saved yourselves. I just gave you a little push." As they drove away, Elliot stood alone under the stars, the weight of his past lifted. For the first time, he felt truly connected to the world around him, a life not defined by wealth, but by the lives he had touched.